Welcome, everyone. We're going to give everyone just a moment to get logged in, and we will be started shortly. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar focusing on gluten-free oats. I'm Marilyn Geller, the CEO of the Celiac Disease Foundation, and I'm thrilled to have such a large group of physicians, dietitians, and patient families joining us today to learn about the latest research, nutritional updates, and cooking with gluten-free oats. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Thank you to Shar USA for their support of our Innovations in Culinary Medicine program. With your partnership, we are able to provide important insights on research and nutrition, as well as practical strategies to our community. We are so grateful for your support. Today's webinar is jointly accredited by the Boston Children's Hospital Department of Medical Education for 1.0 CEU credits for physicians and dietitians. If you are claiming complimentary CEUs for attending today, we will post the link to the CEO survey in the chat at the end of the webinar. This survey will remain open until Monday, April 29th. Credits will be available within 30 days following the webinar. We will take questions at the end of the webinar. Please be sure to put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box, and we will address as many as we can. Please limit your questions to general questions. This webinar is intended to be educational, and we are not able to answer any personal medical questions. Finally, we know that oats are a very hot topic in the celiac disease community. Our goal today is to present the latest research from the scientific community and the most recent guidelines from the Dietitians in Gastrointestinal Diseases group at the Academy of Dietetics Nutrition to help you make informed decisions about incorporating gluten-free oats into the diets of your patients with celiac disease. In partnership with our speakers, we've put all of the information being presented here today on a dedicated webpage so you can refer back to the information later. That link is now in the chat, I believe. We have 3 fantastic speakers for today's webinar. Our first speaker is Megan Donnelly, a dietitian and senior nutrition manager at Shar USA. Megan is the co-chair of the Dietitians and Gastrointestinal Diseases group at the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and a co-author of the recent recommendations, A Health Practitioner's Guide to Oats. Our second speaker is Dr. Ines Pinto-Sanchez from the Celiac Disease Center at McMaster University in Canada. Dr. Pinto-Sanchez is the lead author of a recent meta-analysis study looking at research on the safety of adding oats in a gluten-free diet for patients with celiac disease. Our medical chef for today's webinar is Vanessa Weisbrot, our Celiac Disease Foundation Chief Education and Community Engagement Officer. She was diagnosed with celiac disease 20 years ago and also has a 10-year-old son with celiac disease. She has authored 4 gluten-free cookbooks and will lead you all through 2 recipes utilizing oats in very delicious ways. All right, let's get started. Megan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. I'm very honored to be here with you all today. So I am a dietitian, and so my presentation is really going to be focused on the nutritional aspect of oats. Of course, we will talk about the most recent recommendations by the dietitians that I have the privilege of working with, but I'm going to start with a little nutrition lesson. So here's my disclosure. So what are oats? I mean, oats are basically just a whole grain. And I think there's some confusion here because they come in a variety of forms. And this is all based on how they're processed. So this chart here shows the types of oats in order from most or least to most processed. And the main difference here is how long they take to cook and the texture. So things like steel cut oats take much longer to cook than the rolled oats, which are steamed and cut and rolled out to be flat so that they're much faster to cook. Honestly, the nutritional values are fairly similar from a proteins, fats, carbs, and fiber perspective. But steel cut oats do have slightly more vitamins and minerals. They retain a little bit more of that because they are less processed. So as a dietitian, honestly, I don't get very caught up in this because all forms of oats are nutritious, but it's about your preferences, how you like the texture of different things, and just be aware that many brands of instant oats come in sweetened or flavored varieties, so you want to check ingredients and look for varieties that are lower in sugar if you're thinking about which option to choose. So there are a lot of benefits of oats, and fiber is one of my favorite topics to speak about as a dietitian because it is critical for health. It helps regulate digestion, it helps reduce cholesterol, it regulates blood sugar levels, and it helps remove waste. Rolled oats, and I use rolled oats because that's the one we are typically seeing most people eating, but they have about 4 grams of fiber per half cup serving, which is really great. That's more than 10% of your daily needs. And I just want to quickly mention how this works. So when you are digesting oats, the oats are very what we call soluble and viscous, meaning they absorb water and form a gel in your colon. This viscous, soluble, very gel-like formation in the small intestine actually inhibits the uptake of cholesterol in the digestive tract. So that is why your circulating cholesterol is lower. And then also because it's viscous, it's kind of slowing down the digestion of the oats in the digestive tract, which decreases the absorption of glucose molecules and helps regulate blood sugar. So I use oats a lot, just to help with bowel movement pattern regulation, but also as a therapeutic for cholesterol and blood sugar control. So fiber is really important for health, as I mentioned, and it's actually found in all plant foods, fruits, veggies, grains, nuts, seeds, beans, legumes, basically everything that started as a plant. But most people do not get enough. There are statistics that show that Americans in general only consume about 15 grams of fiber per day on average. And I have this chart here to kind of show you what the recommendations are across various age groups and genders. And it's, if you are close to getting, 25 to 30 grams as an adult, you are doing really well compared to a lot of people. But fiber is very important for health. And this is, if you are wondering about your fiber intake, sometimes adding oats can be a really good option because, like I said, they are almost 10% of your daily value. Oats also have a wide variety of micronutrients. Here's a list of some of the vitamins and minerals that they are high in. Manganese is one of the highest in terms of prevalence for oats. And manganese is a trace mineral that's really important for brain function, nervous system functioning, and production of enzymes. So, the 63% of your daily value is very high. Otherwise, it's just got a good distribution of vitamins and minerals generally. And there are also some antioxidants in oats, and antioxidants are your inflammation fighting molecules. They're helpful for reducing blood pressure and fighting inflammation in general. All right, so I've been talking a lot about why oats are so wonderful, but I acknowledge that, people with celiac disease need to be cautious with oats, but why is that? There is a lot of processing that goes into any grain production, any food product, honestly. And I found this really great chart that kind of lays out all the different points of processing for oats. And as you see, there's a lot of different points. And because of that, there's a lot of opportunities for potential cross contact. And so cross contact with gluten can happen at any point along the supply chain if the oats come into contact with gluten containing grains. And often grain houses are shared. It's not just grain for one type of grain per facility. Oftentimes these are mixed facilities. So what does that mean? For the celiac community, the recommendation is to choose gluten-free oats and oat products. There are a lot of different explanations for what that means. So I'm going to talk you through some of the terminology. So first, there's mechanically or optically sorted. And this means that the oats are sorted by machines or humans, respectively, to remove errant gluten-containing grains. So if they see a grain that is not an oat, it will get removed in the sorting process, basically. There's also purity protocol. You might see this term a lot. This is a set of guidelines that's designed by the company that's producing the oats, and they're using what they call a purity protocol to grow and process gluten-free oats. I'll talk about what that might look like in a minute, so bear with me, but that is another term you might see. There is no standard definition for what this will look like. So this is one of the challenges when it comes to making an oats recommendation, is that if we don't have a standard process for creating a purity protocol, how do we know what really the best practices are? And then there's the gluten-free label. So the gluten-free label is consistent with the FDA standards that the product must be below 20 parts per million. It might be certified by a third party, or it might not be. It might be mechanically sorted, it might not be. It can be purity protocol, it might not be. So it's important to understand that while they might have different methods for achieving the gluten-free label, everything in the United States that is claiming gluten-free on packaging must meet the FDA standard for gluten-free, which is to be below 20 parts per million. That doesn't change depending on what process you're using. So again, there's no standard definition for purity protocol, but I wanted to show some examples of what a purity protocol might look like. So sometimes producers will have dedicated fields, or they'll have a system for crop rotations so that there's less chance of cross contact in the field. Sometimes they're very strict about isolated areas. As we know, things in nature can travel, right? Oftentimes, they will have dedicated processing equipment and facilities, or controlled transportation, or dedicated storage facilities. But all of them will have regular testing to ensure that they're below 20 parts per million if they're claiming gluten-free. So, as Marilyn mentioned, I am part of the dietitians who specialize in gastrointestinal disorders as part of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And we were really hoping to provide a framework to help people make decisions as it relates to gluten-free oats. How do you know how to find a product that makes sense? I want to say that these questions are developed by celiac specialist registered dietitians. So majority of them work in celiac centers, and many of them have celiac disease themselves. And these are the questions that they use to guide their decisions. So does the oat product have a gluten-free label? That's number one. You want to make sure that your product has a gluten-free label as the main priority. How often are you consuming the gluten-free products, oat products? That's a big factor. If it is not something that you want to consume in your diet, then, it's maybe not as much of a thing to worry about for you. So how often are you really consuming these products? Is the oat product certified by a third party? Again, this is not required, but you might be able to get your questions answered a little bit more carefully as to what the processes are. So it's just another consideration, not required. Is the product manufactured in a dedicated gluten-free facility? This one is, also not necessarily required depending on how they're claiming gluten-free, but it might give you additional peace of mind if you're worried about the product. So it's just another consideration. Does the manufacturer use a purity protocol that is clear and transparent? they might not be very transparent, and that might give you pause. So again, is the product certified gluten-free as your first level of discerning? And then after that, can you really tell what purity protocol practices they are using? And is the information about the supplier available? And is the protocol to keep the product safe, clear, and transparent? As someone who works in manufacturing, typically we want to be transparent about that information. We don't want to hide the information from people who are asking because we want people to consume the product. So honestly, call the manufacturer. It is in their interest to help answer these questions for you. The decision to include oats in your diet really is based on your tolerance and preferences. So use these questions as a guide to help you make choices. But the main takeaway is that the product needs to be labeled gluten-free. So just as a wrap up, oats are a nutritious, delicious option that can be part of a healthy gluten-free diet. But the decision to include gluten-free oats in your diet needs to be made with your medical team, ideally your doctor and your dietitian. And that decision should be based on your symptoms, your serology, and your intestinal healing. You can always call the manufacturer, or you can ask your doctor or dietitian if they know the information about that manufacturer, if you have questions about a specific product. So that is the dietitian's take on this. But I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pinto-Sanchez because she is going to get into what the evidence says about the safety of gluten-free oats and celiac disease.
Thank you very much, Megan. This is a perfect continuation. I will share my screen now, my PowerPoint. It is a pleasure to be here, discussing this, the evidence on whether we should introduce oats or not, and the safety of consuming oats for celiac disease when there are such many factors involved in this. So as Megan says, the idea is to bring to you what is the current evidence, the scientific evidence, because behind all these recommendations, we always base our evidence. And as a physician, sometimes, it's important. It's always very important to us to know what is the current evidence, what is the scientific evidence to make our recommendations and decisions for the good of our patients. So this is a continuity of what Megan has beautifully described. Why are gluten-free oats important in our diet, right? As Megan mentioned, gluten-free oats may increase the nutritional value of a gluten-free diet, which when we are restricting, when making dietary restrictions, this is so important as any dietary restriction can lead to nutrient deficiencies. And oats are a fantastic source of these important nutrients. As Megan mentioned, micronutrients and macronutrients, which includes fiber, proteins, and also calcium, iron. As you will see there, I took this picture, which compares different grains. How rich are they in fiber, protein, calcium, iron, and oats are the highest ones. So again, they're very, very important in our diet. And as you will see what Megan says, how oats can help manage also glycemia, which is important for metabolism. Oats, as you will see those curves on the left, this is the glucose levels that spike, those peaks when someone eats, for example, rice or maize flour versus when someone eats oats. As you will see there, the spikes are much lower. And this is very important for management of metabolism, especially when someone has, for example, celiac and diabetes, right? So they are also rich in many of these micronutrients, which we and others have shown that there is a significant nutrient deficiencies in celiac disease on people that are on a gluten-free diet, and getting more rich nutrients is very important. So in addition to that, adding oats can also improve palatability and the texture of gluten-free foods, which is also important, as we know that can be complicated when manufacturing those products. And this is why they are used in many packaged food products, and also provides a variety to a gluten-free. So there are many benefits, but there is a con that oats has been one of the grains recognized as high risk for cross-contamination. with gluten. And this is, as Megan has shown, at any of these steps can happen. So because of this and because of this controversy, there has been many studies evaluating how safe are oats in celiac disease. And there have been like so many studies that physicians and researchers get confused. Okay, so this study says yes, this study says no, what we should do. And when that happens, when there is such a controversial topic, usually this is the next step to perform a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis means it's a type of study that a trained person in this procedure puts all study together, like in a weight scale, and they evaluate different outcomes. For example, are oats safe based on symptoms? Okay, how much oats trigger symptoms? They put all the studies that evaluate symptoms, and then they weight these benefits and risks. So we conducted this meta-analysis years ago to evaluate the safety of oats as part of a gluten-free diet in patients with celiac disease. So we included different studies that evaluating oats in celiac disease or dermatitis herpetiformis who were on a gluten-free diet. Any intervention involving any amount and type of oats along with a gluten-free diet. So we had, to compare the risk, we use different control groups published in those studies. So those were people who were not celiac or were not receiving gluten-free diet or were receiving placebo. And that sometimes happens in clinical trials. We also included other studies that they didn't use any control group as well, but we analyzed that in a separate way because this can lead to different type of errors. So just to summarize how you will see here, when someone does such a big search, you will find hundreds of these studies. If you do in your search, you insert the word oats and insert celiac disease, then you will have like 500, 400 studies. So in our case, we found 422 studies. 420 were found by all these mechanical search, and 2 of them by reading one by one the studies references, we find another extra 2. So from these 422, we eliminated many of these studies because they were not relevant for the outcomes or the topics that we wanted to explore. So from them, 53 of these studies, we review one by one all these studies to extract the information. And then we finally end up with doing meta-analysis, which is putting those in a weight scale for a proportion of them. And what we assess symptoms. That's very important because our patients are main complaint are symptoms. And we wanted to know if people who were consuming oats had significant changes in symptoms. And we evaluate this through different questionnaires. And also we wanted to see if people who were consuming oats versus who don't had different changes in blood markers, like a specific celiac serology or celiac markers. And also we wanted to know if there were some changes in gut inflammation. And there are different parameters to define gut inflammation that we accounted for. Again, this is a very specific analysis. And we wanted also to see whether those changes will be maintained in the long-term follow-up. So are those changes happening right now, like 1 month, 2 months after eating oats, or they are sustained 1 year after when someone eats oats? So we evaluated all these parameters, and we created a big table and of including all these studies, and we divided depending on the study design. We found 28 studies were eligible for to put them together in this weight scale in the meta-analysis. And 12 of them were clinical trials, and 10 were before and after comparison, which again, all these studies design had different risk of errors or bias. And that's why we separate that for analysis to see what are the most, the less chances of error versus the more chance of errors. So as you will see here and in this table, that's probably one of the most interesting and graphical tables. Each of these studies, as you will see there, some of them were done in children, some in adults, with different number of participants and different amounts of oats, because that's another thing, how much oats are enough to trigger those reactions. So most of these studies, the majority of these studies have reported gluten-free oats, or one study, pure oats. And as you will see there, in green, we highlighted when there was no change between people who were consuming oats versus those who were not consuming oats in terms of symptoms, in blood markers, in celiac markers, and in gut inflammation. There were no changes. So oats did not trigger any worsening in these symptoms. In the non-randomized trials, which are the studies that have more chances of errors because they are not following a very rigorous process for clinical trials. So most of the studies were no changes in symptoms, in gut inflammation, but there was just one study that you will see there in red that reported that one patient had worsening symptoms. And that study, in their discussion, they said that that patient may have had contaminated oats. So that's, again, it brings to the topic and more reassurance that there were no changes in symptoms, no changes in blood markers, no changes in gut inflammation. And that specific patient or specific case was more related to contamination rather than oats itself. So same findings in dermatitis herpetiformis. There was no changes in skin or outcomes in dermatitis herpetiformis. As you know, dermatitis herpetiformis, or DH, as people know it, is the skin manifestation related to celiac disease and triggered by gluten. And then when we evaluated the long-term effect, there were no differences in symptoms, blood markers, endoscopy, biopsies, or gut inflammation in gluten-free diet with or without oats. And because of that, our conclusion from these, pulling all these studies together and assessing the benefits and risks, is that oats are safe to be consumed in celiac disease, provided that they are gluten-free or following prior protocol. After this, there has been other studies, and this study is very interesting, that was presented by Jason Tydin. Dr. Tydin is a specialist and has been working, immunologist, and has been working with oats in the last years. And in this study, he evaluated, previous to this study, he evaluated the immune response to gluten challenge. So he discovered one of these molecules that are rapidly increased after gluten challenge, and he tested those molecules and tested challenge with oats. So he did the same study that he did before with gluten, now he did with oats. And this was presented last year at the largest conference in gastroenterology, and the International Celiac Symposium in 2022. And he enrolled 29 patients in that study. And those patients, they challenged with avenin, which is the gluten part in oats. And he noted that after this 6-week period, 4 out of 29 patients had symptoms described by diarrhea, vomiting, pain, nausea. Vomiting was the most sensitive symptom. And also he noticed a spike in this molecule that spikes rapidly and triggers that immune reaction that is called acute inflammation after avenin intake. However, after that spike, that interleukin-2 with that molecule came down and then didn't trigger any other immune reaction. So it's not the typical immune reaction that we see with other type of gluten, like wheat, rye, or barley. So when someone has that immune reaction, that interleukin-2 spikes, and then after that, there is a whole process that leads to gut inflammation. That didn't happen after oats. So even people were feeling symptoms, and they have this spike in the interleukin, that stopped there and didn't produce any celiac reaction, no celiac markers, no gut inflammation, even though he was giving that specific protein, gluten, in oats. So what we can conclude from this other study, in addition to the meta-analysis we did, is that those with celiac disease who do not react to uncontaminated oats can safely continue to include them in their gluten-free diet. So that study still is not published. We're hoping for that publication, but that's another piece and very reassuring work from an expert in the area. So coming from all this evidence, are oats safe for celiac disease? Well, the pros are that you know that pure gluten-free oats are safe for the majority of people with celiac disease. And this is important because oats are highly nutritious and we want them in a gluten-free diet. However, it is true, and it's a reality that some people, or a small proportion of people, can be or become can be labeled as sensitive to oats, so can develop symptoms related to oats. But the reassuring part is that even though people present symptoms, they will not trigger gut inflammation. So that's very important. It will not trigger the celiac reaction. So it will not make the celiac active. What is still unclear is when we should introduce oats. Considering these symptoms and this sensitivity, should we tell everyone to take oats from the beginning, provided they are gluten-free, or should we wait? There are some differences in recommendations by different experts in celiac disease. The other thing that is unclear is how we identify people that will react to oats. Is there any test that will tell, okay, this person will be more sensitive or we have symptoms developed to that? We don't have that yet. That's why we continue. We need more studies evaluating these topics and continue working in research to clarify all these questions that are clinically relevant. And but most concerning than that is the possibility that gluten-free oats are contaminated, could be contaminated, right? So if they are oats are gluten-free, so that regulations on and transparency, as Megan said, of companies processing oats is very, very important here. And we need to work all together in improve that. So in terms of this specific topic, if it is appropriate time, when is the appropriate time to introduce oats? This is an area that I have been very interested in, also and working with colleagues also as a professional advisor board of Celiac Canada. And we're all very interested in this question because even different experts as part of professional advisor board, we don't have the same recommendations on when to introduce oats. For instance, in our clinic, in adult clinic at McMaster, we prioritize the nutrition quality of oats, and we don't consider that because oats don't trigger celiac disease, and they are not, and they are safe to be consumed, so they are not triggered other than symptoms. We consider that it's important to introduce from the beginning. We don't see a reason to not to stop the introduction of oats. However, other experts consider that because of the possibility of sensitivity, they will prefer to just to make sure that person does a gluten-free diet properly, and then to introduce oats and see what are the symptoms that oats are particularly inducing. So again, there is no a clear pros and cons. So then what are the reasons why people for introducing immediately? Well, if we educate well our patients, we can, to avoid regular oats that are not labeled gluten-free, and we stick to gluten-free or pure protocol, that should be safe. So they're highly nutritious. We want to incorporate in the diet. They're a good source of fiber, which we know that gluten-free diet is low in fiber. So adding something that could improve the gluten-free diet quality is very important. However, others that are delaying, they are saying that proportion of patients with sensitivity or symptoms to oats cannot be identified or can be mislabeled as contamination with and confused with when the celiac is active. That's what they prefer to delay that. Again, there is no right or wrong, but what both of us they do is that after in the follow-up, if we see that symptoms are worse and the person is taking oats, so then we remove them from the diet and try to see what are the efficacy of that in controlling symptoms better. So because of these changes in recommendations, in Celiac Canada, they did a survey to all these the healthcare providers to see the variability, and then they presented this in the last ICDS and CDW. And when they were seeing and putting those in numbers, the high variability in these recommendations. So this is a measured problem that we have. And this happens between children and adults and between different clinics. So there is no consensus in that survey. 30% of the respondents says that they have no restriction. They will continue providing oats, and 27 others, or close to 30%, will introduce oats after 6 months only if the serology is normal or symptoms improve. Again, there is no consensus. We really need more research in this area to see if there is any benefit of postponing oats over continue from a nutritional perspective. So we came all together, and we are doing right now a collaborative study in different centers, adults and pediatrics, to evaluate late versus early introduction of gluten-free oats on symptoms, serology, and disease activity. And this was received an award recently, a small award to do some of these testings. This is a pilot study, and we are recruiting for that now. So hopefully we'll have more answers coming soon. So to summarize, what do we know? What is the evidence on oats? Gluten-free oats, and that's important, gluten-free or pure oats are safe for most people with celiac disease and are nutritious and should be part of a healthy, balanced diet, gluten-free diet. And even a recent dietitians recommendations have reinforced this. And however, there are no clear mandates regulating the yield of how to ensure that these gluten-free oats are gluten-free, right? So, and that sometimes we need to be cautious on these and these recommendations because of that. So what we don't know is if there is, when to introduce oats. Still, we don't know if there is any benefits or cons of delaying oats. So we need more research in that area. And we need to study to understand what is the best option. And what is my key message is to our celiac population is consume only gluten-free oats. So they are provided gluten-free. That's the best that you can do as a consumer. And Megan gave some recommendations and to dig deeper and ensure that they are gluten-free. And follow up with your healthcare providers and follow your symptoms. And then the recommendation may change. Let's say that you consume gluten-free, but then you have persistent symptoms. Then your healthcare provider, physician may advise to monitor that and to try to remove. That's a one-by-one artisan work with your physicians. But it's important to monitor that. And then if you have symptoms, again, that may require removing oats, but so far, unless that you develop symptoms, oats are very nutritious and should be incorporated in the diet. So the important part is that as humans do, research evidence evolves. So we need to continue working on this and making recommendations based on the most current evidence. As a physicians and healthcare providers, and I'm sure CDF also is committed to continue working in getting the best evidence and provide them these recommendations. So I would like to thank you. And this is all my presentation for now, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much, Ines. I just want to say how much I'm so appreciative of both you and Megan for being here. You two have been such a leader in this space, and it's just so wonderful to share the latest medical research as well as the nutritional guidelines. So we're going to go into the cooking demo in just a moment, but before I do that, I just really want Megan to come back on and address the issue of a gluten-free label versus a certified label, because there's about 60 questions around this. And so just before we go into talking about actual products, we'd really love for her to address it.
Yeah, so any product that has the words gluten-free on it, it's required to meet the FDA standard for 20 parts per million or less than 20 parts per million of gluten. So the certifications mean that a third party decided to come up with some sort of protocol for testing. They are an external auditor. This is, a big business, and it's a wonderful service that they provide because they do a lot of the testing. So from a manufacturing perspective, it's a huge benefit to have someone come in and check that your product is meeting the standards. But there is no difference from a regulatory perspective. All of these products need to meet the FDA standard for gluten-free, whether they have a logo from an independent third party or they just say the words gluten-free.
Great, thanks, Megan. All right, so we will go into our cooking demo now. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanchez and Megan, for all of that amazing different types of oats and their packaging so that we can talk about how to find a safe gluten-free oat for your family. So I have on this counter a few different brands of oats. Of course, we do not endorse any of these. They're here just for educational purposes today.
But as you can see, there are lots of different varieties, and the way in which the words gluten-free appear on these packages is very differently. So this is a bag of gluten-free quick cooking rolled oats from Bob's Red Mill, and you can see that they are identified as gluten-free in a number of ways. There's a circle with the GF and gluten-free label in it, and then there's also a gluten-free words at the top of the package here. As a reminder, if the words gluten-free appear on the package, they must meet the FDA standard as less than 20 parts per million. Here's another box from Quaker. This is for an instant oatmeal. Gluten-free is identified on the front of the package, just the words gluten-free there. It's also on the back of the box in big letters, identifying gluten-free. This is another box of Quaker product that is a gluten-free oats product for baking or for making oatmeal with. You can see again, it says gluten-free on the front, but then on the back, there's also a whole story about how they test the gluten-free oats, as well as a small little bubble with a GF and a wheat grain, as well as the words gluten-free. Here's another oatmeal product where we have gluten-free in a brown bubble on the front, and again, gluten-free on the back of the box. And a similar with this gluten-free, another brand that makes an oatmeal packet. Again, it says gluten-free on the front of the package and on the back as well, where there's an explanation of how they make their oats. My point in showing you all of this is that when you go to the grocery store, it's important to consider which products you're picking up. As you heard from Megan, make sure that you are always picking up a product that has a gluten-free label on it. It doesn't matter if the product says certified gluten-free or just the words gluten-free. It means the same thing. Just make sure that gluten-free label is there, which means that it meets the FDA standard of less than 20 parts per million. So now that we know about buying oats, let's head into the kitchen and start cooking. We have learned so much today about the research around oats, the nutrition of this grain, and now we are going to talk about how to use them in your daily life to make some different recipes. We're going to make two awesome recipes today. We're going to start with breakfast by making a carrot cake baked oatmeal muffins, and then we're going to skip all the way to dessert and make some monster cookies using oatmeal as the only flour or grain that goes into the cookies. So let's go ahead and get started. Both of these are super, super easy recipes to make and can come together really quickly. So the baked oatmeal, oftentimes we see these recipes where you pour them into a big 9x13 baking dish or a square glass baking dish, and then you scoop it out. My kids aren't such big fans of the scoop out method when it comes to baked oatmeal, but when I put the baked oatmeal into muffin tins, they magically eat them just like they would eat muffins. So that's the method we're going to go with today. But if you like the baked in a dish, you can do that as well. So we are going to start out with some applesauce. This is about 2/3 cups of unsweetened applesauce. You have some melted coconut oil. You could use any oil that you have laying around your kitchen. I happen to really like using coconut oil, so that's what I'm going to use today. You could also use melted butter. You could use olive oil. You could use avocado oil. We have 2 eggs, some almond milk. This is unsweetened almond milk. I'm using a dairy-free milk, but you could use any milk variety that works for your family. Coconut milk adds great flavor to these muffins. You could obviously use oat milk that's labeled gluten-free for these muffins as well, or a dairy-containing milk if that works for your family. The sweetener today is going to be maple syrup. This is about 1/4 cup of maple syrup. No sugar beyond the maple syrup in this recipe. And a little bit of vanilla extract to give it some flavor. I'm going to whisk these ingredients together before I add in the carrots. Now I'm going to put the whisk away that we've got all the wet ingredients mixed together, because as we start adding our carrots and our dry ingredients, the elements will get stuck in the whisk. So it's better to switch to a spatula. So this is 1.5 cups of shredded carrots. I shredded these up in my food processor using the shredder attachment, but of course you could do this by hand with a box grater or any shredding device that you have in your kitchen. So now for our dry ingredients, we are going to start with 2 cups of gluten-free oats. These are old-fashioned oats. You could use quick cooking if that's what you have, but today we're using old-fashioned. Mix that up. As I mentioned, there is no gluten-free flour going into this recipe, just the oats. So as soon as we get those nice and coated, I will add in the rest of my dry ingredients. This is about 3/4 cup of unsweetened shredded coconut. It's going to add some really nice flavor and moistness to these muffins. And then, of course, we do want these to puff up just a little bit. So we have some baking powder, about 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1.5 teaspoons of ground cinnamon for some nice flavor. So one thing you could do with these muffins is you could add in a number of different toppings. So you could add in some raisins, golden raisins or regular raisins would be great. You could add some chopped nuts to it, or you could even add some chopped up dates to them, whatever makes you happy. Also, if your kids really don't like shredded carrots, you could make the same exact recipe with shredded zucchini and you would have green muffins instead of orange muffins. So you can see we've got our batter all ready to go here. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in to our muffin tins. We don't want to overfill these. We're just going to fill them slightly to the top, but not overflowing. They are going to rise a little bit, but not too much. All right, we're going to pop these in the oven for about 25 to 30 minutes until they're fully set. We'll be right back. Our carrot cake oatmeal muffins are ready to go. I'm going to let these cool down to room temperature and then they will be ready to serve. You could also make these the night before, pop them in the oven in the morning, or do them at night so that they're ready to eat right as you're ready for breakfast in the morning. I hope you enjoy these. It is time to make dessert, and we are going to make some awesome oatmeal monster cookies with just some very basic ingredients. So this recipe might look familiar to some of you. I was diagnosed with celiac disease 20 years ago, and back then it was almost impossible to find a gluten-free all-purpose flour. So the favorite cookie recipe that we all shared amongst our celiac support groups was the peanut butter cookies using 1 cup peanut butter, 1 cup sugar, and 1 egg. This recipe is a play on that recipe, but with a few added additions to it, like oats. We're using old-fashioned oats in the recipe today. We are using a little bit of butter, a little bit of vanilla extract, and topping it off with some M&Ms. So this recipe started out very basic. It's still super simple, but with a few added ingredients that make a big difference in the taste and nutritional quality of the cookies. So let's get cooking. First, we have 2 eggs. We're going to add them into our mixing bowl here. I'm using the mixing bowl with a stand mixer because it is much easier to mix peanut butter into a recipe when you have a stand mixer. You can absolutely do this in a bowl, but it'll make your arms a little bit more tired to get it all mixed in perfectly. So I'm going to cream together the eggs and the sugar and butter. This is butter made using avocado oil, so we're keeping these as a dairy-free base. But again, you could use any butter or oil that works for your family. We'll start mixing that up. You can see it's already creaming together, lovely. I'll add in my vanilla extract. Now I'm going to stop the mixer to add in the peanut butter so that it doesn't pop up and push the mixing bowl up. So we're going to open the lid here. I'm using a chunky peanut butter. You could absolutely use a smooth peanut butter, an all-natural peanut butter. You could even make this recipe using almond butter or sun butter or wow butter, depending on allergies in your household, or if you're making these for your kids to take to school and they're not allowed to take nuts in. We don't have a nut allergy in my house, so I'm going to go ahead and use this chunky peanut butter because that's what we like to eat. It definitely helps to have a spoon or a spatula to get the peanut butter out of the cup. It can be very, very sticky. There we go. So we'll go ahead and mix this up. It's going to mix for about 30 seconds. All right, I'm going to turn the speed down a little bit. We're going to add in some baking powder to give our cookies a little bit of a rise. And of course, our oats. This is 1 cup of old-fashioned gluten-free rolled oats. And now we're going to turn it down to the low setting, and I'm going to add in my mini M&Ms. You can add in any candies of your choice or none at all. My kids really like M&Ms, so we're going to add those in today. I'm not going to add in the full cup though, because I want to save a few to put on top. All right, we're going to scrape down our paddle. And then we'll be ready to dip these cookies out onto the cookie sheet. This is what our batter looks like. Again, super, super, super simple to make. So here I have a prepared baking sheet. It's just a normal baking sheet, and I put parchment paper down on top so that our cookies don't stick. If you don't have parchment paper, you could also put foil down or just spray the cookie sheet with nonstick spray. Either will work. All right, so I'm measuring out about a tablespoonful of dough. We want to keep about 2 inches in between these cookies because they will spread once they're baking. And we'll go ahead and fill up the baking sheet. You should get about 2 sheet hands full out of this recipe. If you like your cookies a little bit puffier, you can leave them absolutely just like this and go ahead and put them in the oven. I'm going to flatten mine down a little bit because I want to put M&Ms on top to make them just look a little bit prettier. So I've wet my fingers just a little bit in some water so that they don't stick to my hands. This dough is extremely sticky, and so wetting your hands will help prevent it from the peanut butter from just coming right back up onto your fingers. You just need a little bit. They don't need to be soaking wet, just enough to press them down without being covered in peanut butter. Now to finish my cookies, I'm going to put a few M&Ms on top of them. My kids absolutely love seeing cookies with M&Ms on top, and so this is just to make them a little more beautiful. Again, this is not necessary. It's just an added little touch. You could also add nuts. You could add crushed peanuts to the top, crushed almonds. You could put some coconut flakes on top. I know my mom would absolutely like the crushed coconut on top. You could put dates on top. There are so many options of things that you could do with these. You could also roll them in cinnamon sugar. A lot of people like to add cinnamon to their monster cookie dough, so into the mixing bowl with everything else. I don't love that, so I didn't do that today, but that's absolutely an option that you could do. Or just sprinkle some cinnamon sugar on top. What's really nice about this recipe is that it is super flexible and you can really make it however your family will enjoy it. All right, so there we go. We're going to pop these in the oven at 350 degrees for about 13 minutes until they're set up, and then we'll be ready to eat them. Our monster cookies just came out of the oven and they smell so delicious. I cannot wait to eat one of these. I am going to let these cool for about 10 minutes before I pick them up, just so that they have a little bit more time to set. But here they are, and they are ready to eat.
All right, so I hope everyone enjoyed the cooking demo, and now we'll ask both Dr. Pinto-Sanchez and Megan to come back, and Marilyn will take us through some of the many questions that have come in today.
All righty, thank you to all of our speakers for your fabulous presentations. And I'm very hungry right now, Vanessa, thank you. Before we start with our Q&A, on the screen you will now see 2 QR codes for our post-webinar surveys. Those surveys help us improve our educational programming and understand how useful the content is for you, our viewers. If you are a patient or caregiver, please scan the code on the left. If you are a health provider, please scan the code on the right. And for health providers claiming your CEUs today, you must complete the survey by Monday, April 29th. The link is also available in the chat for each survey. You may need to scroll up. And now we're going to open up our Q&A with questions that have been pre-submitted by our studio audience. And question number 1 is, and Dr. Sanchez and Megan, I'll just let you field them. How do you know if severe bloating and gas comes from a reaction to gluten-free oats themselves, contaminated oats, or something else like irritable bowel syndrome?
Ooh, I can take that one. So this is where working with a dietitian can be really helpful, because not every symptom, every digestive symptom you're ever going to have is because of gluten exposure. And IBS is absolutely one of the possibilities that could be causing those types of symptoms. So I would just say you really need to be working with your dietitian and your medical team to try to navigate that. Oftentimes they will do a number of different strategies, a diet recall. Maybe they'll try challenging certain foods in a different way, different things like that, to make sure that they're really figuring out what is the problem in that situation.
Yes, I would like to add, expand on that, on Mega's answer. So bloating, distension, and symptoms are very, difficult to determine where they come from because they can present in the same way due to many, many different reasons, and can be in addition to an IBS, for example. There has been studies showing what proportion of people with celiac disease, they have persistent symptoms despite adhering to gluten-free diet very strictly. So it's very well known that 30–40% of people in the follow-up can have persistent symptoms. So whether that's gluten contamination, whether that's related to IBS, whether that's related to other food components, sometimes is fermentable, the carbohydrate part, not the, gluten is a protein. Well, sometimes it's not a reaction to a protein, it's reaction to the carbohydrate parts, whether it's lactose intolerance, whether it is bacterial overgrowth, whether, all these, whether there is an inflammatory component there. For example, some patients with celiac may have inflammatory bowel disease associated. So that's why it's so important to work and follow up with your healthcare provider to determine what these symptoms is, where that symptom is coming from. The first thing we do in our clinic is we work together very close with our dietitian. And the first thing we do, because majority of cases reported by different studies have shown that a great proportion of patients with persistent symptoms, they have unaware gluten contamination. So the first thing we do is spend 45 minutes with our dietitian reviewing all these potential situations that can expose a person to gluten. If there is no source of contamination, we start doing all these tests to rule out different organic conditions or functional conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, working with, of course, the healthcare provider, in that case, in the celiac clinic, is myself and my colleagues. So it's not that easy, not that simple question. So it's important to work with your dietitian and your doctor to determine the origin and to provide a proper treatment for that.
Okay, next question. How do I know which types of gluten-free oats to buy? Quick cook, steel cut, or old-fashioned?
So
Yeah.
good question. And Megan and I might have different opinions on this. But so if I'm baking, I go old fashioned or quick cook always. I think that they come out with a much better texture. The steel cut ones can be kind of like mushy or gummy, or just like chewy in general. Also, so one way to think about it, and I have little kids that are 8 and 10, and so I use quick cook a lot more often in baking because they have less texture to them, and they're a lot smoother when you bake with them. They're a thinner cut, so as Megan talked about earlier, they're sliced thinner so that they quick cooker, and so in turn, when you bake with them, they feel less like a grain in your mouth and more like you were just baking with a flour. So that's how I think about the differences.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about preferences. So start with what you like. I think that's the best way to do it.
And try them all. Try different varieties of them.
Okay, so the next question, and I know that we have both the Canada and the US represented here. So Cheerios bear the label gluten-free, but they don't carry any company's third-party certification symbol because General Mills does their own internal testing. So are they safe for a person with celiac disease?
So I can start. I mean, based on the available data we have, they carry a gluten-free label, which means that they meet the FDA standard for gluten-free. There has not been an issue, to my knowledge, in about 10 years with Cheerios specifically. So, we have to trust these standards that are put in place.
Dr. Sanchez, anything to add?
No, I agree. I agree fully with that, with what Megan said.
Okay. All right. Is there a test to know if you are reacting to pure oats?
I can take that. So reacting how? So that, again, as I show in that meta-analysis, there are different type of reactions. It could be measurements in the blood, those blood markers, those spike in this like an acute molecule, those spike in the celiac markers. It can be intestinal inflammation, or it can be symptoms, right? So all these different reactions to oats. So, and If there is a test to symptoms, which is most people with sensitivity to gluten-free oats will have, there is no test because it's subjective. And there are questionnaires that you can rate the scale, but there are no objective testing for that. And then we can measure the celiac markers in clinical practice, but that's a different story. And then that will tell gluten contamination rather than reaction to oats.
Okay, next question. If we are integrating gluten-free oats into our diet, how much is safe per day?
You know, that's really going to depend on the individual. Whenever you're trying a new food as a dietitian, I say start small, start with a smaller portion to see how you do with it and work your way up to what a full serving would be. I mean, I don't think people are typically having multiple bowls of oatmeal per day, but you know, I always like to tell people diversify your grain sources so that you are, you know, getting a variety of nutrients. I don't think we have like an upper limit, but you know, a serving or two a day is like what my gut is telling me, but yeah.
So I agree, Megan. And the simple answer is there is no limit, but it's important to know that with any food, too much of one thing, even if it is good, is not good. Too much water is not good, right? So you will not drink 8 liters of water, right? So too much fiber, the recommendation of fiber 30 grams, but you're not going to have all of them all at once, right? So it's, again, you need to spread that out and see how you tolerate that. And the variety is the key here.
Okay, so I think that answers the next question, which is how should an oat trial be done to see if they can be tolerated? Do we have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, you
ask the answer.
start small, see how you do, wait a couple days and then try maybe a different way of preparation or a different serving size. It's typically how we do it, but it's going to depend on the person and how they prefer to eat whatever food we're challenging.
Okay. Our dietitian is adamant that we avoid oats altogether and sent us to a website saying that no gluten-free oats are safe for celiac disease. I find this hard to believe. How do we know what information to trust online about gluten-free oats?
Yeah, so based on the available peer-reviewed medical literature, that is not the case that you need to avoid gluten-free oats. We have to go with what the published peer-reviewed medical literature tells us. So unless it's coming from some, you know, like, for example, the studies Dr. Pinto-Sanchez was sharing, that is not published data and we can't assess the quality of it and it's not validated.
Dr. Sanchez, anything to add to that?
Yes, no, and also common sense, because if all oats were contaminated, then everyone will have active disease, right? So that's not the case, right? So people have been consuming gluten-free oats and doing well. Celiac gut heals, celiac markers are good. So again, we don't know how much yet. What we really need is to standardize a protocol that everyone follows this safest way, or companies produce in the safest way that we can access that information. We need transparency and a standardized protocol. But until we get there, that will take some time. I think what is important is to rely on gluten-free and to work with your dietitian and doctor to monitor your disease.
Okay, thank you. All right, do any over-the-counter supplements help with the digestion of gluten-free oats?
No.
Okay. It's a no from both of you?
There is no evidence for that. So the digestion of oats is complex because it involves carbohydrate, proteins, right? So oats is a complex grain that has different components, and different digestive enzymes will contribute to digestion of this, but doesn't mean that breaking that down will have better or will improve health. So we need, there is no evidence that any of these enzymes will help tolerating better oats or not. But it's an interesting question.
Okay, I know that we are over time. Am I to keep asking questions or just move straight to the end?
I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. I know that Dr. Sanchez has a busy clinic of celiac patients awaiting her arrival.
Okay, then.
We start at 1.
All right, so we are definitely out of time for today. A huge thank you to all of our speakers and to our proud sponsor, Shar USA, for supporting this webinar series. We want you to please mark your calendars for Wednesday, September 18th for our next webinar entitled Supporting Families with Picky Eaters. Oh, that is a good one for me. Registration details will be available soon, and we look forward to seeing you then. Appreciate everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.